Chapter 16. Every grief is different. Each person who dies is different, and yet all deaths are the same. Someone stops breathing and disappears forever. When we have no idea of what dying or death looks like, it is completely unknowable. We do not know how we will react. And even when we have witnessed dying and death before, we still cannot know how it will be this time. When my mother called my daughter and me from our bed in the early hours of the morning, just before she died, despite all the preparation, I was frightened. I remember saying to Alexia that I don't want to do this, as we ran downstairs to her. I felt suddenly that it was beyond my courage to hold my mother now, if she was truly going to die. But it passed as quickly as it came, and we did hold her as she died. There was nothing for me to do when I returned to Alan's house after his death. I thought I was calm and dealing with it very well, but I remember not being able to sleep, and the darkness of the late October nights being long and powerful and full of demons. The day, when it dawned, gave me hope that I would survive. I did my waking in the winter darkness at 6:30 every morning to go downstairs to sit in Alan's chair in the sitting room. I would look out through the French windows into the darkness and wait for the sun to rise at around 8 in the morning, rising slowly over Alan's beloved tennis club in the distance past the trees. I would hold on to the sun rising as if my own life depended on it. It became a ritual to hold on to, something to do in the middle of a terrible nothingness that I knew that I would have to deal with. Every grief is different. I thought I was dealing with Alan's death very well, but I was unaware of how oddly I was behaving. It took a great deal for me to leave the house at all. I would try to go out when no one would see me or notice me. It was essential that I became invisible. I could see people looking at the house, and I knew they were worried about me, but I did not care. I thought it was an obvious thing to do, to hide like this. When I look back on it, I wonder if neighbours and friends thought that I may need an intervention. Perhaps they thought I was going to take my own life. But all I wanted then was anonymity and nothing. I had the television during the day and the sunrise after the black nights, and these became my focus. After Steve died, painting him became my focus. After Mum died, I read every word of Jane Austen and disappeared into that world. When my brother Dominic died, I had a one-woman show to perform in Brighton, and I put all my focus into that. Here, in Alan's house, on Alan's chair, I became fixated on watching Agatha Christie's Poirot stories and any crime documentary I could find on the television. I watched all of them, and then all of them again. They became my safe spot, and when I had to turn off the television at night time, I knew I would come down later in the early hours and wait for the sun to rise out of the blackness behind the tennis club, and I would have survived another night. And so, into this strange nothingness, my neighbours bringing me food made with love and kindness and asking me no questions was a wonderful thing. When Alan had been given his diagnosis, I had no time for it at all. He called me on the day that my brother Dominic had died. Sitting beside Dom just an hour after he had gone, the call came from Alan telling me that he too had been diagnosed with cancer and had about 6 months to live. Not now, I remember saying to him, call someone else. Leaving Dominic's body in good hands in Edinburgh the next day, I travelled back home and straight into rehearsals for a one-woman show on dying that I was performing at the Brighton Fringe. There was no question that I would not do it. I did not want to spend time with Alan because I had no room inside for this new journey, and so the one-woman shows took over. I was frightened. Alan was my rock, and if I did not talk about the prospect of losing him, I would be safe. I knew his family would look after him, and I took myself away to focus on myself and my work. Alan seemed to understand. He did not complain. He was an amazing man. He supported me during that time, despite his own declining health. I was not in denial of his illness and prognosis. I just could not cope with it at that time. I had lost my mother, and then Dominic, and now Alan was telling me he too was going. Not now, I kept saying, not now. Even as he lay dying in the hospice, I went to see a counsellor there. I cannot find space for Alan again, I said. All my grief and sadness is for my brother Dominic. I expected some disapproval, but I did not get it. The kindness and understanding of my counsellor in just one session laid the confusion and distress to rest, and she told me that I was doing the best I could and not to expect too much. I know you love Alan, she said. I have seen you with him. You do not need to do any more, and he has all that you can offer. It is possible to grieve for your brother and love your husband. You do not need to be any more than you are right now. After the show, from his hospital bed, Alan proposed to me, and everything changed again. With a new energy, I threw myself into his care, became his sole midwife, and married him. There is not always grief after a death. Sometimes there is nothing at all. Sometimes there is relief. Sometimes there is satisfaction. A man I knew who mourned his mother when she died, but held an angry contempt for his father. Years later, he came to see me as his father had just died. "We will celebrate," he said. "I have waited for this moment for a long time." And so we did. Celebrate. We had fish and chips, and he said that a dark cloud had lifted from his life. Never once did this man change his mind. "He is gone," he said. "It is about time." He felt satisfied that at last his father had died. A dear friend lost his father a few weeks ago. Estranged from him, and not having wanted to see him as he was dying, a text message told my friend that his father had just died. "Oh," he said, and went to work. "I expected to feel something," my friend said, "but I felt nothing. Perhaps I will feel something later on." The father had been abusive, manipulative, and cruel. "I tried to find one single good memory of him," my friend said, "but I couldn't. There was not even one. Not one." About 20 years ago, as an adult himself, my friend had answered the door of a family member's house to see his father standing there. He was just a wizened little old man, not the big bully I had remembered, he said. My friend did not let his father come in and told him to leave. From that moment, my friend was no longer afraid of him. "I stood up to him," he said. But the father had died alone in a dirty little room with no one wanting to see him. My friend looked to himself to see how he felt about this and came back with, "Nothing. I feel nothing." His father had made his choices and had destroyed everything he had come across. My friend thinks that he was a psychopath. A few weeks have passed, and my friend still feels calm, accepting and relieved that his father has died and can cause no more harm. But much of my friend's life and all the troubles he got into were a reaction to the rejection and abuse from his father. The man who ate fish and chips in celebration of his father's death had an angry coldness about him. For him, it was a kind of revenge. But my friend is calm and has resolved much of the unhappiness with his father over the years, and so is able now to acknowledge what his father did and how he behaved, and not take it personally any more. Asked now how he feels, my friend says he is sorry his father was like he was, but still feels nothing at all. And no, he didn't go to the funeral. He hears that only 2 people turned up. It is important to take some time to listen to anyone who is dealing with death. It is important to take time to hear what they are saying. We do not know how another person feels, and we do not always know their story behind the events. It is natural to make judgments about people and to read situations superficially. We all do it. But when dealing with grief, dying, bereavement, and loss, we need to remember to listen deeply. Listening without judgment will create a safe space for those who are suffering and will take the pressure off the listener, who does not have the answers, does not have to sort it out, and does not have to be right. To find someone who will listen calmly and with focus and empathy to all the darkness and strangeness in the long process of grieving is essential to remaining grounded and not becoming lost in the madness in one's head. Many years ago, when I was just beginning my work as a soul midwife, I was asked to visit a dying man and to sit with him while he was alone. He was in his 80s, a very tall, large man, drifting in and out of consciousness. He was agitated and looked distressed. I sat beside him and took his hand. I remember thinking what lovely hands he had, and how pleasant he seemed to be. I thought, he looks such a nice old gentleman. All I could do was sit quietly and speak softly, hoping that he would be soothed into a calm sleep. All the while I held his hands. His wife arrived after some hours, and I prepared to hand over to her and vacate my seat. Instead of coming to see him and sit beside him, she went and sat at the far end of the room on the windowsill. My first thought was perhaps walking into a room to find a stranger holding her husband's hands had upset her, and so I went over to see how she was. It was clear that something was not right, and I worried that I had made a mistake that had upset her. We began to talk, and she explained why she sat by the window on the far side of the room. They had been married a long time, and he had been controlling and unkind. She was not allowed friends. She was not allowed out of the house without his permission, and he kept her short of money. This had been her life for the many years she had been married. Now he was in here, and she felt free. He was not going to lock her in the house and prevent her from seeing anyone. He was not going to isolate her from her family. He was not going to frighten her. She was very small, and he was very big. "Do I really have to be here?" she said. I asked if she would like me to remain with him instead, and she could leave. She wanted that very much, and after a little while she left, without saying goodbye, without even looking at her husband in the bed. Going back to sit with the dying man, I thought about how I had liked this man just from holding his hands. How wrong I had been. The image I had formed of him was not the one his wife had described, and I wondered at how little we really know. But he was dying and helpless, and I did not know him at all. Whatever I thought about him now, I wanted to keep hold of the impression that his hands were lovely, because perhaps that would help me not to judge him and become distant and unkind. I stayed holding his hands and talking very quietly until somebody came to take over, and I believe his wife did not ever come back, nor say goodbye. I did say goodbye to him, because I had glimpsed a lesson from him and his wife, a lesson that is ongoing to this day, and will be until I die too, a lesson involving detachment, acceptance, love, kindness and truth. And I said goodbye to him because right now, more than anything else on his vulnerable last day on earth, he needed kindness and respect.